We are very lucky to have a VIP moderating today's panel, Rachelle Riley. I'll introduce Rochelle and then turn the meeting over to Rochelle to introduce our panelists. Rachelle Riley is a Director of Arts and Culture for the City of Detroit. The author, essayist, blogger, and arts activist ended a nearly 20-year stint in 2019 as a columnist for the Detroit Free Press, where she was a leading voice for children, education, competent government, and race. She is the author of The Burden, African Americans and the Enduring Impact of Slavery, and the upcoming What They Lived, 20 African Americans Who Changed the World. She travels the country with The Burden, speaking at libraries, churches, and universities about the burden that America still bears because it refuses to deal with the aftermath of enslavement. Rochelle also is a co-founder of Letters to Black Girls, a project that grew from a friend's single presentation to a national mission to pass words of encouragement from Black women to girls. She makes frequent television and radio appearances, including on National Public Radio and on WDIV Local 4 and Fox 2. She lives near the banks of the Detroit River with her 16-year-old dog, Dessa. Please join me in welcoming Rachelle Riley and our panel discussion, Women in Activism, Steps to Take Every Day to Make Change.
Thank you so very much, and thank you to the group and to all of the amazing women who are part of this group and who all work 8 days a week. I am thrilled to bring you this panel, Women in Activism, Steps to Take Every Day to Make Change. The Detroit Together Digital Conference is about the future of the women's movement to address activism and social justice, something we all have to embrace more than ever. So what better way to support women than by hearing from some powerful women activists? I'm thrilled to be joined by Lauren Bealore, Michigan Political Director for America Votes and an entrepreneurial opportunity maker. I love that phrase. She's a Michigan State University grad with a Bachelor of Arts in Social Relations and Policy. She honed her leadership skills as president of the Case Black Caucus, chair of the African American Celebratory, and treasurer for the Zonta International Golden Z Club. She's also proud of her work as a James Madison College peer assistant, and she helped raise $800,000 in campaign elections in 2014. She currently works with partners on strategic planning that include Planned Parenthood, Black PAC, the Sierra Club, and Color of Change. She is a commissioner on the City of Southfield's Total Living Commission and co-founder of the women-owned nonprofit YAB. I could go on and on, but then we would be on Tuesday. So please welcome Lauren Bealore. I'm also thrilled for you to know Dessa Cosma, Executive Director of Detroit Disability, Power, and a social justice activist fighting in the environmental, LGBT, and reproductive justice arenas. She grew up in the Deep South, like I did, splitting her time between New Orleans and Augusta, Georgia. She attended the University of Georgia, got a bachelor's in international affairs, a bachelor of women's study, and a bachelor of anthropology. After graduation, she worked as a senior field organizer for Planned Parenthood, and she helped organize the U.S. Social Forum, which brought nearly 20,000 people to Detroit 10 years ago. She served as the Michigan Program Director for the Center for Progressive Leadership. She became the Executive Director of the Economic Justice Alliance of Michigan, where she forged collaborations with some of Detroit's most dedicated economic and racial justice champions. In 2018, she started Detroit Disability Power to grow the organizing power of the disability community. Please welcome Dessa Cosma. And please meet Sam Kelly. She's a social media strategy manager at AmeriCares, a global health nonprofit supporting more than 4,000 health providers and health centers from Detroit to Dominica to the Democratic Republic of the Congo. She and her team responded to about 30 disasters each year. She currently provides PPE, surge support, and training for frontline heroes battling COVID-19. A proud Bolivian American, Sam is a nonprofit community builder, and she leverages all social media in support of improving global health, and she serves as a consultant for social media, prioritizing conversations over connections. Most recently, she leveraged her passions of championing diverse abilities in social media in creating Amtrak Access Now, battling Amtrak's limited ADA compliance. When not on social, she's an ultra runner, a dog shelter volunteer, a food bank volunteer, and she can be found embracing all things Agile as a certified Scrum Master. Please welcome Sam Kelly. So, ladies, I'd like us to get started by talking about our paths, where and how along your path other women provided mentorship or guidance that nurtured or sustained you, and how you do the same. Dessa, why don't you get us started?
Thank you so much, Rochelle. Good morning, everyone. It's really nice to be here with you. And, you know, I'm having a lot of flashbacks to my women's studies undergraduate days and really loving that and feeling somewhat nostalgic. You know, for me, I would say that I was politicized at a very early age by being different than most of the people around me. As Rochelle said, I grew up in the Deep South. My parents are actually Midwesterners, so I was the only generation of Southerners in my family. And so we were very culturally different than the people around us. And a lot of that actually had to do with gender roles. So my family is not Christian. My family is very progressive. My mom is a very ardent feminist. And that just like didn't fly that well in places that we lived when I was growing up. And that combined with me being a person with a disability, I've been a wheelchair user my whole life, made me realize really quickly that people in power make decisions that work for them and don't necessarily work for the rest of us. So decisions that get made about how our society is set up, it was very clear to me that things weren't supposed to be for everyone. And so that really politicized me at a young age. And being raised by a single mom who was a feminist in a culture that was very different than our family culture, I realized by about the time I was 11 years old, I can either be real quiet about my values and try to fit in and be liked, or I can be my real self and I can practice having very difficult conversations all the time so I can be authentic. And that experience in the mid-90s culture war era, being a pro-choice, pro-LGBT rights, disabled young woman, really fired me up and is what made me an organizer. And my mom has so much to do with that. And along the way, as I got older and met other disabled women who had been fighting for disability rights before I was born, people like Kathy McAdam, if any of you know her here in the Detroit area, a blind woman who was my first disabled mentor. That made all the difference in the world to me for feeling confident and capable to be a leader in my community. And so I'm forever indebted to them. You are muted, Rochelle.
Realized that. Thank you so much for that. And what about you, Sam?
I can definitely echo with Dessa having a really strong mother, and she was appointed the role of being my dad's caregiver when he got injured before ADA and became a quadriplegic. So really just seeing them tag team, this is long before ADA, when they had a fight just to get into restaurants, there were no ADA parking spots. And so growing up and seeing that was really powerful. Mom also was an ER psych nurse, so always being able to lean on her, even now, 31, and she has really just been this silent, she's my secret weapon. I think that's the best way to put it. So I'm always honored to, tell her story. And I always say that, I would have loved to have a Latina woman in my life to look up to, but I realized that that wasn't my experience. I had my mom. And so now it's time for me, in a way, to send the elevator back down and be that Latina for others.
And we will elect a woman in your lifetime and mine. My mom is gone, but in her honor, I will continue to fight for that. I wanted to ask you the same question, Lauren, but I also want to ask, one of the things that women, in addition to being mentors and having mentors, is we provide a lot of the care roles for so many people. Talk a little bit about that same question, but how that guidance, you have to get it, but also give it.
Yes, thanks, Rochelle. So good morning, everyone. So that's an excellent question. I think the starting point, what was mentioned through Sam and Dessa, they mentioned the maternal role of their mothers playing a role. So that already kind of shows from the foundation of giving birth that already are coming from a nurturing place. So I think that kind of ties in. I will say that one of the mentoring roles for me, who I feel like kind of shows the mothers of the community aspect, would be Shirley Chisholm. And I actually wrote a poem about her when I was in 6th grade because I read her words. It was entitled More Than a Woman. It also was early 2000s, so it was the Detroit's own Aaliyah era of things. So there was a connotation to that. But, her words resonated with me and kind of have been steadfast throughout my career. And that was that, you're automatically defined when the doctor says it's a girl. And those words, in addition to, you can't stand on the sidelines whimpering, complaining, constantly resonated with this idea that my intersectionality, even before, in her era, before it was coined by Dr. Kimberly Crenshaw, my intersectionality is going to play a role, being a woman and being Black, play a role in how I go about advocacy moving forward. And so I think to tie it into this nurturing component, I think as women, especially women of color, especially that of Black women, a lot of times we're carrying burdens on our back really from the time that the doctor says it's a girl. And so I think that plays a role with the heavy load sometimes that we have to carry when we're thinking about activism and what that means for us. It's not simply just, going out and, raising havoc, so to speak, on an issue. It's truly trying to figure out the quality of life for the communities that we come from and represent.
When we move into the questions later, Sam has asked a really good one of everyone. I want you to think about this. Who is your secret weapon? And is it always a woman? That's not her total question. I added that last part. I want to talk about fighting for change, which quite frankly for women does begin from the phrase, it's a girl. You have to know your enemy. So what are the greatest enemies to improving opportunities for activism and success? We know sexism is sort of right up there near the top, but talk about that and other challenges that we face and what we can do to eradicate these problems. And why don't we start with you, Lauren, this time and then go back the other way?
Sure thing. So obviously toxic masculinity is heavy on that list, at the top of the list, actually. But also, I want to challenge everyone today and actually say that feminism could actually be seen as an enemy as well, because, and I am very appreciative of the movements that have come before us. So I'm not trying to, negate any progress that has taken place. However, I feel that it's important to talk about the fact that many people were left out of this movement. So granted, we're celebrating the centennial of the ratification of the 19th Amendment, but there were several women who were at the forefront, many of them being, again, women of color who were left out of the movement. And even if we think about the pink hats era, as we moved into Me Too following 2016, again, there were a lot of women who still felt like they were left out of the forefront when we looked at the Women's March. And so again, I hate to bring up intersectionality again, but actually I don't, because it plays a vital role in this idea of movement building and this idea of activism. And we can call out sexism and toxic masculinity, but sometimes those that are in the majority can be just as bad as a heterosexual cisgender white male.
Let's explore that a little bit, because we do tend to get in each other's way a lot and have for years. For instance, I celebrate suffrage with the Voting Rights Act. So it doesn't negate all the work that was done from the early 1900s till now, but my parents didn't have the right to vote until much, much later. But Dessa, can you talk a little bit about that intersectionality and what we can do to make that coalition better, because that's something we particularly need in this country if we want women's power to, if all women voted the same way, we'd elect every president. So explore that a little bit too. Thanks for bringing that up, Lauren. Dessa?
Sure. This is something I think about all day, every day. I'm usually talking about this from the perspective of the need to dismantle ableism. And ableism is the systemic discrimination of people with disabilities, if that's a new term for you. I do not believe that we can dismantle any system of oppression without dismantling all the other systems of oppression. So, for example, if we are interested in the liberation of women, but we're not paying specific attention to trans women, Black women, disabled women, poor women, immigrant women, we're actually not eradicating sexism. We're just eradicating sexism for a small group of women with more privilege than other women. The same can be said if we're trying to eradicate ableism, but we're not paying specific attention to immigrant disabled people or Black disabled people or trans disabled people. And so to me, it may sound daunting, but in actuality, the only real strategy is full liberation for all people. Otherwise, we're always going to be leaving out members of our own community. And I am not interested in replicating that sort of exclusion or marginalization. And so strategically for me, in my both my professional and my personal activism and organizing, I'm always thinking about how do we center this work on the experiences and needs of people that are multiply marginalized, people who are on the receiving end of multiple systems of oppression. Because if we're not making our work benefit those folks, we're not actually doing our work. And so there's a lot more that could be said about that in terms of like, how do you actually do that? But what I'll say is principles of disability justice, which come largely from queer people of color with disabilities, who you can tell already are at the intersection of multiple systems of oppression, the principles of disability justice really call us to slow down and include everyone, leave nobody behind, as they say. And I think that that is something, just that in itself, just slowing down and including everyone, pushes back on white supremacy culture, pushes back on patriarchy, pushes back on ableism, and says, you know what, including each other, leaving nobody behind is worth slowing down, and is worth maybe not doing everything we thought we were going to do at this summit, at this event, at this rally, whatever, because it's actually a radical act to include everyone.
Well, the idea of unified struggle has never quite been an action. It's just been a myth and a dream. So I'm so glad you said that. And I can't tweet while I'm moderating, but I am writing down multiply marginalized so that I can literally make that a hashtag for the rest of the day. So thank you for that. I want to talk a little bit about this idea of activism. When I interviewed Tarana Burke, who of course felt like her whole movement, which was a decade old by the time everybody discovered Me Too, felt marginalized herself. And she talked about how hard it was to stay healthy and socially well-fed because you're constantly under attack. I want us to, like you said, slow down for a minute and talk about what this struggle does to us and how we work together to keep each other strong. With the stress of activism and the stress of the fight, what should we be doing more to look out for each other and to create some healthy coalitions and some healthy self-building and you know, some way to look out for each other better? Sam, why don't I start with you?
Sure. So one thing I've just been doing this week is sharing a resource, and I'll drop it in the chat when we move to the next speaker, is New York Public Library. About a couple of months ago, started free resilience coaching. And these are professional coaching. Sometimes they charge thousands of dollars for a couple of sessions. So it's something I've been tapping into, but I've shared it with a handful of people, and they're all going to take advantage of it. So I think just being able to not only flag, you know, hey, like I might be going down, but also saying, hey, if you need this, this is here for you. I'll also drop in the chat, mental health first aid is a really great training, and it's completely free. There's multiple different ones. You can do youth, you can do senior, you can do child. And so you can take advantage of that, especially now because there's so many sessions being virtual all over. So those are two key resources. One thing from me is just learning, especially because of COVID, kind of how to adapt and not step away from my habits. So I've been more gentle on myself within my running. I've been running for almost 13 years solid. I've started with marathons, and that little change has been running with water, which usually I don't. But I found, since I'm running on trails, not so much road, that I'm falling down. I'm falling down a lot. You can't see it because of the light, but I'm not really carrying water actually to drink. It's more for when I fall down to wash myself clean. And I that is mimicked as well in my art. I'm not committing to these big pieces of art. I actually have something called a Buddha board, which lets you paint with water. So I can go in and paint, 10 seconds, 5 seconds, write a letter, draw a circle, and I'm still able to channel that creativity, but not hold myself to something that is, might be more static and or, last longer, because it's painting with water, it evaporates.
Those are all great. I can tell you, I don't run unless something's chasing me. But my dog Desi and I walk 2 miles every morning. He's 16 years old, and I know it's keeping him alive. And I also want to let you know that everybody on the chat wants your shirt. I think that people need to understand that the past, the present, and the future is female. So you got to put in the chat how we can get that. Lauren, what about you? What types of things can you offer fellow warriors to keep us all sort of safe and healthy? I'm going to start carrying the water too. I've never fallen, but I think I should have some with me. Lauren?
Yes, so there are a couple of different resources that I use myself. Honestly, I have started taking breathing classes. This year has just been daunting. I feel like we're in a different decade every month. The one I specifically use is Black Girls Breathing, but there are tons of other resources available to just take a breathing class. And it honestly is actually just as satisfying as, it's taking place of going to the spa, because I'm not doing too much human contact activity. And so that's something that I feel like you can do virtually. But even in the component of our class, there's also a period where people just release. We've had like over 100 women in that class, and to hear everyone's different stories, at least the ones who shared, was truly refreshing, because, a lot of times we miss the component of community, especially when we are attached to our digital devices, and in a virtual period, that's all the time. We're on Zoom every 5 minutes, no pun intended, I guess. But there's also an app, and it's called the Liberate app. And that is specifically for people of color who are dealing with microaggressions at work, who are dealing with constantly working towards anti-racism every day. But it is an excellent app and resource for individuals as well. And then there's also different Slack groups that I've been a part of, even prior to all of the uproar of activism that has come out of this year. And there's Lemonade, Ladies Get Paid, if you just want to empower each other about going after salary negotiations, but also different opportunities from that. So I feel like there are so many resources, in addition to finding different things of getting outside, actually for all of the Michigan people out there. There is an activity called Belor Trails, and it is literally a magical forest. And so I did it, and I truly enjoyed myself. So I highly encourage doing that. It's out near the Commerce Township area. I just encourage seeing it for yourself.
I've never heard of that. Thank you so much. And thank you for mentioning breathing, particularly as we're all masking up. I had no idea how much I wasn't breathing deeply until I went outside. Nobody was around. I took the mask off to take a deep breath, and my lungs said, "What are you doing?" It was just not the usual thing that, so that is so important, ladies. And I'm so glad you mentioned that. Let's do one of those quick questions. I want a quick 3-item checklist for impact for good. The 3 things, literally quick answers that will make a difference, so everybody knows something they can do. Dessa, why don't I start with you? If you're ready.
Oh no, I'm not ready. I'll be ready in a minute though. Come back to me.
Okay, well, Lauren, you look ready. You were nodding.
Yes, so 3 things people can, 3 words of what people can do are restructure, repower, and reignite.
Love that, particularly reignite, because we've always had moments of ignition in our history, and then we slow down like we don't have to keep the fire burning. Sam, I lost you on the screen, but
I think I'm back.
oh, there you are. Hi.
Sure. This is
three powers for good.
This is something I started when I was in college. So start with your heart, never wait on change, and smile on.
Love that. Love that. And Dessa, you ready yet? I can go if you're not.
I'm getting there. Okay.
Okay.
I would say true inclusion is revolutionary. When we actually include people, we in a full way, we transform to the point of revolution. Secondly, I'd say the way we do the work is the work, meaning that how we treat people and ourselves in the process of achieving social change is as important as the end result, because it is actually modeling the world we're trying to live in if we're doing it right. So the way we do the work is the work. And I would say that, a constant attention to work-life balance is probably the healthiest approach to social change as well.
Balance. I love that word. Mine are simple. Know what you know, learn what you don't, and act. For what difference does it make what you know if you don't do anything? I want to get to this sort of cerebral question, because this is something we deal with all the time. Every generation for centuries has always said they had it the worst. But it seems that even though women are making progress and have made lots of progress over the past century, the work seems to get harder and harder and more complex each year as people of various genders and ages and geographies try to keep power and make sure they're in charge. Am I imagining that it's worse, or are things really getting better? Sam, why don't we start with you? And everybody is still wanting your shirt. I'm just telling you.
Yeah,
you guys focus. We'll get back to the shirt. There's great mental health and resiliency coaching and some questions coming up, but people are like getting back to the shirt. We are the future, but let's talk a little bit about where we are in the landscape now. Because some people think we really do have an amazing opportunity now that people seem to be more woke than usual. Are things better, or are they worse? Is the job harder?
That's really hard to say. That's super personal. I think for me, things are getting better. And so I was adopted from Bolivia, which is in South America, center of South America. And I've gone back a few times. And the first time I went back in 2010, it seemed just walking around. I was definitely accepted as being adopted, but just seemed like walking around, there was a lot more harshness and grittiness to the culture within the city that I went to in La Paz. And when I went back in 2014, there a lot had changed in the city, particularly two programs that I want to talk briefly about. One is there was really bad traffic congestion in the city of La Paz, and the government found a way to bring theater to this problem. And they started with about 12 young girls who were dressed in zebra costumes and went to mime and theater schools. And so downtown La Paz, you literally started with zebras interacting with the pedestrians and stopping cars right to the 2 or 3 inch mark. And so that, to me, shows that we need to approach these old problems with new ideas. And I think that's what's happening more now. And the second one, also in Bolivia, the traditional chalitas, so women who mainly man the house, because they do step up, they lock down that house, and they do a lot of their vendor work during the day as well. And so these chalitas have really formed this collective force that has never been there before, not only to stand up for their rights, whether it's in voting, whether it's different accessibility issues, or honoring different diverse abilities. And that has never been done before in the history of Bolivia. And so we also have a new Bolivian woman president as well. She's my age, she's 31. And so, for me, looking at this history and tradition that's just being throttled with all of these new ways of thinking, that's why I think right now things are getting a little better, at least historically and texturally in Bolivia.
That gives me hope, not just the Bolivian president, which I'm so glad you mentioned because I was excited about that. But the zebras, I have to look that up as soon as we're off. Thank you for that. Lauren, same thing. Are we making progress? Are things better? And what types of things are you seeing that take away the traditional old way of doing things and some new strategies or some new things?
So I do think that there's been change. I think that, you know, even seeing as we've moved from even 2016 to now, and people choosing to, they're choosing to be an uprising of new voices and new faces of leadership or movements. You know, from Ayanna Pressley to AOC to Rashida Tlaib, several other women leaders that are in the forefront. And I think that that is something you could deem as progress. But also, too, I think, you know, when we think about like diversity, equity, and inclusion and or racial equity and inclusion, and implementing that into different structures outside of just the political sphere, but even thinking about corporate entities and balancing private and public sector, it's important to consider that the word progressive would have to be redefined a little bit there. And maybe that's something we just need to redefine in general. And there's been conversations just about what liberal is, what progressive is, you know, what are some of these terms that we're using to describe change when we still are on the receiving end of a lot of the same decades of issues that have taken place. And so I do want to acknowledge that, yes, we see new faces in the forefront, but we haven't really seen new issues come to light. And I think Dessa and Sam definitely noted in both their own ways the importance of acknowledging still the LGBTQ community, transgender voices specifically. It's so important to understand that multi-marginalization, or as I've called it, secondary marginalization, is something that I still feel like is the undertone of what we're not addressing.
That's a good point. I also want us to retire some of the language because it doesn't even mean what it used to. I refuse to use the word progressive, for instance, but that's a whole nother conversation. What we're going to do now is move into our audience, these fantastic women who have great advice for lots of things. But I want Shauna Ramsey to unmute herself to ask a very important question since I was the media for so long. Shauna? And if you, there you go. Hi.
So how has the evolution of media impacted activism, either positively or negatively, in your opinion?
Dessa, why don't you start?
About media?
Yeah. Positive, negative, helpful, not? Is it all our fault?
I don't think it's all your fault. I'll start there. You know, media is obviously very powerful. A force, you know, it could be a force for good or a force for evil. In my opinion, I think good journalism is different than all media, obviously, and should be held in a high regard and treated as a profession with ethics and rules and that kind of thing, which is of course questionable many times. You know, I guess what I'll say, I'm not an expert on the media. I certainly think about the way that information is communicated and language is used all the time as a disability justice activist. But I'll say, like, I don't have social media. I don't have social media at all, and that is a mental health choice for me. People wonder, like, how do you know what's going on in the world? How do you know what party to show up at, back when we used to have parties? And you know what? I pay attention to the news. I talk to a ton of people. I do know what's going on, but the constant barrage of real news mixed with fake news, mixed with weird things, to me, it seems like too much. And so I actually think that for mental health reasons, there are a lot of people whose social media actually is not good for. Teenagers, in a lot of cases. There's a lot of performance on social media. There's a lot of not being authentic, and I want to live in a world that's authentic. And so I've opted out of that. And so that's one thing I'll say about media. The other thing I'll just say is there are certain groups people with disabilities are one of them, that are so rarely covered in the media in any sort of meaningful or respectful way. And to me, it was appalling when COVID started and the kind of overall narrative was, calm down, everyone. It's just sick people and old people that are going to get this thing. Chill out. And I'm like, wait a minute. What if we are the sick people and the old people, right? Like, aren't our lives valuable? And I kept waiting for the media to come to disability community to say, what do we do? You all have been shut in your house. You all have been working remotely. You all have been, doing all these things that we're all now forced to do. Why don't we get some wisdom from you? Nobody ever came, and nobody ever responded to the press releases where we offered to share that wisdom either. So I think there's a long way to go. I have great respect for journalists that are real journalists, but it's a mixed bag.
I absolutely get it. Sam, what about you? Media, no media, better, worse?
I think that comes down to you having to be strategic for yourself. And so one thing, as a leading social media at AmeriCares, I really have to be super tight on community management. So we could get tagged by JJ Watt, and I have to react in that moment, because I know if I do, then we're going to get the most traction. And that ultimately could lead to more patients getting the help or medicine that they need. And so I've really learned how to do that for AmeriCares. And then personally, I know when I'm ready to come full on. And so with Amtrak Access Now, that I knew I had the expertise. I know enough about the algorithms as a social media manager. So I knew that was that intersection that I had to step into. But personally, I haven't posted anything in 3 years. And that's, very much on purpose. And one thing going back to AmeriCares is we have reps at Twitter, at LinkedIn, at Snapchat, at TikTok. Dessa will be proud to know I almost yelled at our TikTok rep the other day because it's completely inaccessible. There's no audio descriptions, offers of aught tags. And I take that very personally, but now because I have that power of AmeriCares where I can reach and be a media source myself, that I'm really learning to balance that. And so I think media is really going to be your kryptonite or your jet fuel, and that's only up to you to decide.
Well, I can tell you that, on any given day, I'm 20 years old, I am 40 years old, or I'm 80 years old. And that's how I sort of approach social media. I unlike you, Dessa, think that social media can actually be a great tool. But for instance, on Twitter, which I'm on every day, several times a day, but I control my community. So I only have about 12,000 followers, but I've probably blocked 12,000 people. So I can keep my feed, there are names that can't show up on my feed. And then I wind up meeting people of like struggles and like causes. For instance, I was just on demanding that people mask up, and there was a nurse in Florida that I'd never heard of who was talking about how she was on her 3rd week on mask. Because their hospital wasn't doing what they wanted them to do, and they didn't want to tell anybody. So I sent her mask. That never would have happened without Twitter. So I just want to say I do understand people who don't want to do it, and it's a very healthy choice, and I'm proud of you for making that choice. But for those of us who do, I don't want people to think that you have to put up with some of the crap. There will never be anything about Tucker Carlson, for instance, on my feed. But we want to get to another question from the audience, and this is about the upcoming election, which is so important, and we're getting near the end of our time. Brenda wants to know if anyone wants to talk about how to get more involved with the upcoming election. What should people do? And Lauren, I want to start with you. Particularly for women, we girls have got to really jump into high gear.
Yes, absolutely. So I'm going to go through a laundry list of resources. For starters, people can log onto the michiganvoting.org website. It is a hub and database with a collective of partner organizations that has a full resource of information. You also can go to, and it also includes information in different languages, the Know Your Rights Guide, registration information, poll worker sign up. And you can also go through ACLU, who's been working with the Election Protection Hub of things. We actually have been partnering with the organization I work with ACLU, to do monthly webinars And yesterday we just did one on tech tools and 40-day campaign and poll worker sign up as well. Also too, there is MVIC, which is the Michigan Voter Information Center, has tons of information as well. Also want to encourage, engaging with, there's different components of entities you can engage with, like Higher Heights, She the People, of course, Emily's List, and you can check out their endorsement list to see what women candidates you want to support. There's so many, a plethora of resources. I'll include my personal website because I actually have a Lauren's Law page on there that has tons of resources available that you can just click on as well. But mainly that, I highly want to encourage voting early as well. This election is definitely going to be determined by absentee voting in Michigan. The primary was 70% absentee voters. And so, want to encourage that. Ballots do hit your mailbox on September 24th, and there'll be plenty of messaging coming out from organizations as well as the legislature, specifically the Dem Caucus of the legislature, who'll be pushing out information about voter tools and how to track your ballot. So again, tons of resources available. I'll include my info just in case people want to follow up to get even more resources.
Thank you so much for that list. And if you could also go to the chat, everyone who has any activist groups, nonprofits, anything that you want to make sure to tell people about while we've got this amazing group of women warriors on the line, please add that. We have one last question. How can you help how can we help your organizations? This is a thank you for being on the event today from Together Digital. Is there something in particular that we can do for you, Lauren, Dessa, and Sam? Everything? Nothing? Donations? Love?
I'll chime in. One thing you can do for me is actually take care of yourselves. That's huge that I would like to see for everyone. It's been a draining year, but it's a draining life. We put up with it. We do the work. We show up. Also too, again, just going to plug that you could vote. So please do that for me and yourselves. And again, it doesn't just have to be voting by mail. You can also drop your ballot off at the clerk's office or a Dropbox location. And there's in-person voting is still available. I just didn't want to limit it to just that one option.
Very good.
Want to encourage doing that. Please do it for me and yourself.
Dessa, one thing that we can do for you or your group.
Yeah, thank you. So asking yourself in all the decisions throughout your day, professionally, particularly, how is this impacting people with disabilities? Am I making room for everyone to participate? Am I dismantling the internalized ableism that I have? And how can I learn more about disability culture and experience?
Absolutely.
Asking ourselves that all day will get us to amazing places.
Thank you so much. And we will do that. And quickly, Sam?
Sure. Just to echo, I think we all should be looking beyond diversity, equity, and inclusion, what is not actually included in those, because I would argue that accessibility is not interchangeable with either of those. So really challenging that thought, and then just knowing that, knowledge is power, but only when it's applied and accessible.
Well said. And I went to the clerk's office and got my absentee ballot application yesterday, and they said I could vote on September 20th. So I will be going right back to that same office to vote in person absentee on September 21st. What Lauren said, vote, vote, vote. It is the way to make a difference. And please make sure that you look in the chat and see all of the amazing ways that we can help each other, all the resources that are available. I need anything that helps with resilience. I need anything that's going to help with the elasticity of this movement, which is a non-ending, never-ending, always there movement. And don't forget to tell us, Sam, how to get your shirt. We want that. If you don't tell me, I'm going to make it.
I have to go back to the drawing board and look it up.
But thank you again so much to Together Digital, to our panelists, Lauren Bealore, Dessa, Cosma, and Sam Kelly. I'm Rachelle Riley, Director of Arts and Culture for the City of Detroit, and I'm going to share the screen for 1 second to tell you the title of my book is actually called That They Lived, African Americans Who Changed the World. Every Famous Person Was Once a Child. So you'll hear about that. It comes out in February, and I would love for everyone to teach all children all the history of America. If we do that, we can solve so many of our problems. Thank you very much.